Next speaker is John Yaist, also from California. He is the technology evangelist at ESRI, the Environmental Systems Research Institute. I just looked that up. We all know that from the ArcGIS software, which they produce. He has a background in environmental science and cartography, and he says that he's from Southern California, which is a very different climate from here, which he wasn't here during the summer, though. I think we weren't that different. So thank you, John, for coming up to talk to us. And welcome, John. So John's going to talk about an aptitude for resilience.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, I woke up this morning and I was a little nervous about talking today, but it seems listening to these last couple talks, I have some larger concerns to be nervous about. Not the least of which is that $2.79 I spent on potato chips last night could have been spent better elsewhere. So thank you, Steve. So I'm here to talk to you about, my name is John Yaist. I work for ESRI, the Environmental Systems Research Institute. And it sounds like the audience is somewhat familiar with the company and what our software does. In colloquial terms, mapping. And we do geographic analysis and spatial analysis. We hosted earlier this year what we called the ESRI Climate Resilience App Challenge. And I'm calling this talk an aptitude for resilience in my lame attempt to kind of capitalize on this catchy, snappy trend of naming things today in the startup world, which is where I've spent a lot of my time talking. So onward we go. A little bit about the background of how this software contest came to be. In June of 2013, President Obama and the White House announced their climate action plan, and there were three major components to this plan. Was to cut carbon pollution. A real tenet was to help communities prepare for dealing with the impacts from climate change related events that they were going to endure, and then established the United States as a leader in international efforts to increase communities' resiliency to these events that were going to take place. Part of this climate action plan was the Climate Data Initiative, and that tenet was really to make use of these large open sets of data and to get technologists to use their know-how to take a look at different media, both desktop, mobile, and web technologies, and use this data and build software from the ground up, starting with the data rather than just starting with software and adding data to it. This Climate Data Initiative, it was really to spur innovation and create businesses. That it was a fulfillment of the federal government on a promise they've made to make use of their widely available sets of data that are free and that are related to climate change. And this Climate Data Initiative its really major goal was to spur innovation and creativity in the form of creating businesses around it. The motivation, what ESRI jumped on board with this, we as a company feel that geography is a primary mechanism, a primary tool for helping communities to become more resilient to these impacts that they're going to feel in the future. And the ArcGIS platform, what we feel is, it is at its heart, it is innovative in the sense that what you can use it for is to reveal unseen patterns in your data and get at the heart of data and see visualizations that aren't readily available through pie charts and graphs as readily. The geography can reveal different things about your data, different ways that phenomena relate to each other. And through those insights into that data, it could spur strategic decision making to help communities position themselves better in the future for dealing with issues that were going to arise from issues and impacts from climate change. And that was really at the heart of our motivation for getting involved with this. And we sort of attacked it from this three-pronged approach. What we were going to do is we were going to pilot 12 communities and provide geospatial technology in the forms of professional service engagements, consultations, software, web services. we piloted communities that had experience in this realm of dealing with climate-related events. So some communities off the top of my head: New Orleans, Tamarack, Florida, Wake County, North Carolina. These were people who had firsthand experience of dealing and making changes to deal with climate change. And so we were providing them with technology to help move that forward. We built a geo-collaboration portal, which was an online location where we seeded this portal with different web maps, different applications, different services that people could go look at and get inspiration in different fields related to resiliency. There was a transportation hub, there was an economic development hub, there were disaster management hubs, and not only could people get inspiration there, but they could also contribute to it. So the goal is that over time this becomes a well-known resource that community leaders, citizens, scientists, researchers can go to for data, web maps, applications that are relevant to this field. And the last thing we did was we held this app challenge. That was how we were going to contribute. And we felt that a software contest was a good way to tap into the technology community and see when you put a kind of nebulous topic like climate change in front of people who have technical software skill sets, what did they come up with and how did they approach this problem? And so what we did was we hosted this app challenge and we put the theme of dealing with climate change out there as kind of an umbrella and thought that was a good target, but we didn't specify any further than that because we didn't want to restrict anything. And so we wanted to spur creativity and innovation from all sectors of the globe in terms of helping communities become more resilient, both in how they prepare for and how they respond to events that they were going to undergo that we knew were going to happen because of climate change related impacts. So we had a lot of participation in this challenge. We had over 300 people participate, and what we did was we set it up where the teams were required to not only submit an application that we could go and access and test and run and see what it did, but we wanted them to create a video where they told their story of how they incorporated technology and what they really felt this was going to do to help prepare communities for dealing with events in the future, and why was what they built going to help a community be more resilient to things that they were going to face in the future. So we had 35 overall submissions that fit that criteria, and an initial panel of which I was part of. We narrowed that down to the top 13 set of apps that we passed on to an interdisciplinary panel of judges composed of a couple Esri employees, a chief scientist, an application developer, and then we pulled in people external to Esri from the Public Technology Institute, which I think is a government think tank. We brought in a civic entrepreneur who had funded a company in San Francisco that brings together it's an urban accelerator where they have an application process and developers who have an idea to build a company that's engaged in civic-oriented software. So that CEO was a judge, and we had local government officials from Boulder, Colorado participate in the judging process as well. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go through a brief summary and show you the top 13 submissions and give a little bit of an explanation as to what they were, and then go in a little bit about my interpretations of listening to the judging panel, what kinds of things they were really looking at in terms of what made technology useful in this area and why these apps stood out from the others. We had a really wide array of applications submitted. There was a wide diversity of topic and scale addressed, and I'll go into that a little bit as I talk about each of these apps. This first app was called Coastal Resilience 2.0. What this was a web-based, a decision support tool where you could go and identify risks in coastal areas to particular events, and you could input different scenarios that then would help you implement nature-based solutions to alleviate the impacts that coastal communities might endure from things like sea level rise or storm surges. This tool, the Community Resilience Inference Measurement, what this did, it devised a scoring mechanism where the team had done a lot of complicated modeling behind the scenes, and then they gave an interface where you could input different parameters, and then it would give you a score for a community as to how resilient they were to particular events that were relevant to that region. And that score was based on the two dimensions of vulnerability and adaptability. So how vulnerable were they to these events, and how adaptable were they to changes that needed to take place. The Community Viz web app, what this was this was primarily a sharing mechanism where scientists or researchers could undergo these complicated analyses that had sort of geographic results. And this tool allowed for an easy way for those results to be shared in a way that would make sense to people without the technical background and the knowledge to perform the analyses. This tool, this Culvert Inventory for Climate Resilience, what this team built a template that communities could use and citizens could engage with mapping the culverts in their community. And this was based on the premise that culverts are often an overlooked yet crucial component to a community's transportation infrastructure, and vulnerable not just to extreme events, but moderate ones. And the damage that these culverts took could cause large disruptions in transportation from minor events. So without a proper inventory, it's hard for communities to assess and prioritize repairs for culverts in their communities. The Every Drop LA application, this was an end-to-end platform. It was a way for a community to host something, and it would provide citizens in the community a mobile tool where they could report on situations in a community where water was being wasted in some manner. And then the community itself would have some kind of centralized dashboard where they could monitor what was coming in and push notifications out and stay informed. And then they could, hopefully the goal being, they would then prioritize either cleanups or mitigations to the situations that were causing the water waste. So it was really a water conservation idea. Flood Forecast, what this was another web-based solution, and what it did, it allowed users to subscribe to the service, and then if they were subscribed, they could receive notifications that were based on NOAA flood advisories and FEMA flood mapping zones, that when their property was in immediate risk of flooding, they would be sent text notifications. And it was interesting they used text because texting is still the most available means of communication, particularly during disasters. The Global Forest Watch Commodities application, this was really a suite of 3 tools, and it came at the problem from the business supply side of things. It gave organizations who were mining raw commodities for their business a way to monitor what kinds of impacts they were having in forested areas. And it also gave consumers of this company or buyers of this from these supplies, they could check and see whether this company was certified as to having undergone reasonable efforts to mitigate the kind of damages they might incur by getting their raw materials from certain forested areas. And it presented alternative forested areas that they might get their commodities from as well. This Local Food Alternatives in Washington County app, this was a web map, and it inventoried alternative food sources like farmers markets and local co-ops, that alternatives to the grocery store, so a different place for people to access food. And it was a web map that gave them ways to get there and announced where they were. The Minnesota Solar Suitability Analysis application, what this was, this made use of freely available LiDAR data, and it underwent a very complicated set of analyses on that LiDAR data and combined it with a lot of geospatial processing in our software suite, where the result was a statewide coverage of solar radiation potential across the state of Minnesota, which had never been done before on a statewide level. And then, so anyone with access to this app could zoom in on any area in Minnesota and calculate how much solar radiation would be generated from that particular location over some given time frame. So consumers could use it for their rooftops. Solar panel installation companies could use it to analyze an entire field. So it was a site suitability analysis location. The Modeling Community Erosion from Climate Change app, this used high-resolution scientific data to do historical, current, and future modeling of soil erosion. And it allowed for users of the application to zone in on areas and see what was their current status in terms of soil erosion, and how vulnerable were they to future soil loss based on different scenarios of land use in that area. And it also pinpointed them towards resources that could help them devise mechanisms to alleviate those kinds of vulnerabilities and those risks. Save the Rain. What this was an application that allowed people to investigate what kind of household operations would they be diverting away from the community water supply if they collected rainwater on their property. So if I collected rainwater, how many toilet flushes am I saving? Or how many car washes could I save with collecting this much rainwater? And it combined that with a lot of mapping and visualizations of different environmental parameters that you could look at different mapping scenarios. My way to go was, this is a visualization product that allowed people to take a look at commuter transportation patterns and visualize those in different ways. And then it provided a whole platform for you to take a look at what would be the impacts particularly to different parameters, but particularly to carbon release if you took different modes of transportation on different pathways. And the Urban Heat Risk Explorer, what this was a mapping of the phenomenon of urban heat islands, where temperatures were either higher or lower than means in concentrated areas. And it was a comprehensive tool in that it tried to deal with preparation, response to, and recovery from these events by providing locations of cooling shelters, and then looking at how could urban canopy tree cover alleviate these urban heat risk islands. So it gave visualizations into that phenomenon of urban heat islands and extreme heat events in 3 particular urban areas. And so those were the top 13 submissions that we received. And what I'll do now is I'll tell you who won. The 3rd place winner was Save the Rain, so the fact that you know how many times you were saving toilet flushes was compelling to people. 2nd place was Flood Forecast. I think that in particular, this was an app that was built around the Boulder, Colorado area, and those local government judges who happened to be from Boulder were extremely, not political, extremely excited that this app was available, and they thought it would be particularly useful to incorporate into their web operations systems to make available to the citizens of their community. So it was a very compelling app to them, and this was the overall winner. This generated quite a bit of buzz in the judging process, and those in the know of terms of imagery processing. This was quite an astonishing application, and gave people a lot of hope in the future that other states would take the same approach that Minnesota did, that each county created all this LiDAR data so that this kind of statewide processing could take place. So this was who we selected as the 1st place winner. And what I hope to do now is sort of summarize for you my interpretations of listening to these judges deliberate. It was really kind of fascinating to just be kind of a fly on the wall in the room to hear these different perspectives that came at the angles that these applications were taking. What was most often asked about an application, and the first comments that came up were, was it understandable who was going to use this app? Did it make sense to the judges as to who would hold it in their hands or type in the inputs? Did that make sense to them? And were there incentives for using this application? And what would keep people using it? Those were the kinds of questions that judges asked, and what they were really particularly interested in was, given that I think climate change is this sort of big nebulous topic that's hard to relate to like a purchase of potato chips, how do you change people's behavior on both an individual level, but also a more communal level? How do you influence policy with technology like this? Were there incentives for these applications for people and communities to change their behavior, to make impacts on this? So those were what was compelling about a lot of these apps, is that there were some of these incentives in there. The application had to be simple to use, right? I think, there was a comment from one of the judges that some of the apps were trying to put too many raisins in the muffin. There was just too much going on, where there was a lot of value in these apps, but for the normal, reasonable human being to use them, it would be impossible, right? And even a science person, like somebody who had knowledge about geographic information, like I would look at it and be like, I'd never pick that up. So there were applications like that there was value in them, but there was either too much going on, or so it couldn't be too complicated. It couldn't be overwhelming. And we being that we hosted the contest, we were interested in how did people incorporate our technology, but not just our technology. We were looking at what did they do with open data? How did they incorporate data, and did they combine it with our tools in a way that was either particularly new or that led to different kinds of results? And last, most of the questions had to do with, okay, so could this application be transferred to either a different community, or could it be used somewhere else? Was this something that could be replicated or transferred to a different community, or was it just sort of a hyper-local kind of application? And I think those were the major themes that stood out to me as the things that made applications stand out from the rest in terms of why the judges felt those three in particular deserved money, which is what they won. So now what? Right, so I wish I could tell you that, before this contest there were 5 gabillion tons of carbon being released, and now after the contest there's only 2 billion. But I cannot say that, right? So we haven't solved the problem yet. So what we did do, and we are not a company that can provide we're not an incubator, we're not a place that's going to fund something that we find really interesting, and we're not going to fund it to completion. But what we did do is we held a lot of promotion efforts about these apps. We hosted the winners at our annual user conference, there are over 15,000 people that come to this. We had different spotlight events at that contest. We had press releases. We've hosted these applications on our geo-collaboration portal. We've pinpointing people to these applications as these are tools. These are legitimate tools for you to get started, helping your community become more resilient. These are technologies that are accessible to you now to get started. And we're also inquiring into these technologies. Are there things that we would want to incorporate into our own platform? Or can we encourage these people to release these into the marketplace, whether it be the Google or Apple marketplace or our own GIS marketplace? And just so to conclude and wrap up, I think the most interesting aspect of this challenge for me was to see, okay, when you put the topic of climate change into people's hands, into technology people's hands that weren't necessarily scientists, what did they come up with? And as you could see, there was a wide variety of topics that people approached this challenge from, and some dealt with apps that would be used by individuals, others were national level analyses, others were statewide. So there were different scales that people approached the problem from, and that I think was particularly interesting. And also, how did people try to make this something they could relate to on a daily basis? So instead of climate change, what could I do to my individual daily behavior, or what did this mean in terms of what I did on a daily basis? I think that was something that came out of this, particularly things like the culvert inventory, something I might see every day but not relate to climate change. So with that, I'm done. And if there are any questions.
on here for some questions. Any questions for John? Raise your hand up so we can bring a mic around to you.
I've stunned them. Oh no, there's some.
Over here. Bunch over there.
Thanks, that was great. I'm Heide Diefendorfer from the Pacific Northwest National Lab's Marine Science Lab out in Sequim. And I just was wondering about the part of your program that you didn't talk about much concerning this 12 communities that you sponsored, including New Orleans. And you specifically mentioned that you went to communities where people have experience dealing with some of the things like relative sea level rise. I'm just wondering if you are making any kind of follow-on effort to take that experience that you learned from communities out in the Gulf and so on that are so much far ahead of us, more far ahead in sea level than we are out here, in terms of bringing those experiences and lessons learned to the Pacific Northwest as we start to face that ourselves.
Well, I can't speak to specifically what plans there are to bring them to bring what we learned from New Orleans to the Pacific Northwest. I think, my own personal experience with New Orleans, that a team of us went to New Orleans and gathered information from them that really did focus on what they have learned from their experiences in dealing with disasters, and what would they need to avoid the kind of catastrophe that took place there, in particular in 2005. But from the New Orleans perspective, the thing that came out, what they really are interested in is crowdsourcing applications. And we are not, we currently don't have the infrastructure at our company to host crowdsourced applications yet. We are working and moving in that direction as part of incorporating that feedback from New Orleans to try and, but that was really kind of, at least my interpretation of meeting with New Orleans officials, that was one thing that they feel, in terms of mitigating disasters, crowdsourcing, and in particular towards the goal of responding more quickly to things, crowdsourcing is going to have to be an integral part of that, because they just can't scale to collecting the kind of information that they needed to deal with the kind of things that they had to deal with in response to that particular hurricane disaster. But it would be similar to the kind of flooding they undergo there. And I wasn't intimately involved with, other discussions with other communities. It was sort of a pilot program, and the goal being to really learn about what kind of practical tools could these communities apply. So hopefully that answered your question.
Hi, I'm Jason Barbos from the Union of Concerned Scientists, and thinking about the replicability of the First Place app, and that the app required the statewide LiDAR data, and I know some other cities have done similar solar maps, New York, LA, but I wondered if you happen to know whether those sort of statewide data sources are available in other states.
I don't have firsthand knowledge of that. What I learned in dealing with the team that produced that application, it was produced by a team of graduate students from the University of Minnesota, and I think universities are particularly more on top of data sources than most. So, but Minnesota, to my understanding, what the state itself did was charge each county with producing this LiDAR data. And I think that's what makes Minnesota different at this point from other states in the union, to my knowledge. Write that in pencil, that's not in ink, I don't know for sure. But in terms of sort of the buzz that came out of that application, that was what was unique about Minnesota, was that the counties were responsible for collecting that data, and then these students had behind them the power of the Supercomputing Institute at the University of Minnesota. So the kind of analysis the kind of firepower that analysis required is not at the ready for most people.
Hi, it's Paul Pickett.
Hi.
I was interested on your list of what made them top submissions, and I didn't see data quality on the list. And it kind of, some of the things you
we
had
don't care
there,
about that.
No, I mean, some of the things, having worked with coverages, the data may be very sparse, it may be very coarse, matching the application to the available data sometimes is an issue. And I was wondering if you want to comment on that. I mean, is that a factor that was looked at?
Well, I started my career at Esri in the technical support group, and so I was on the phone with a lot of people, and we had a saying behind the scenes. Don't tell anybody about this, but garbage in, garbage out. And that is true with data. If your data is bad, your results are bad, and so that's a valid point, right? If you're processing on data that's inaccurate, your processing doesn't really help. So data is at the backbone of everything, and I think my own personal opinion is that the idea of open data, it is often hard to interpret the data sources that are out there. I can look at it and then not understand what it means. I mean, I can see that it's a table of data, but I'm none the wiser after looking at it because I don't understand what the abbreviations at the top of the column mean. Like, I don't understand what the numbers are. So there's a lot of, but that is where technologists can combine data sources that then can make that human readable. But your point about data is perfectly valid. If you're building an app that's centered around data that isn't of high quality, then the usefulness of the app is compromised.
Hi, Sasha Peterson with the
Hi.
American Society of Adaptation Professionals. So I appreciate the presentation and seeing the breadth of impacts that were considered by the folks working on the apps. I'm curious where you said you're not going to incubate these particular companies and help them move forward or these particular applications. Are there thoughts about how do you make that information more useful, accessible, and distributed? Like, are you thinking about linking those different pillars that you described with what's going on in the communities with these new cool visualizations to support their efforts? Or maybe there's something in that middle sector with that portal that you discussed. Like, how do we make it broader and more applicable?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think primarily where we see what we can do with these tools, since they are readily available. You could go download these tools or take a look at them and contact the people who wrote them now. But that is where we're focusing our efforts, is using the machine that we have at Esri, the marketing machine, to get the information out there, that there are tools available to people, particularly at the community level, for beginning to question whether how is this community prepared to respond to the particular kind of climate change related events that particular community may face. So, and in answer to your question, we do have it out on that portal. Esri, at least my own experience, it's not mainstream software, right? It's not Google Maps. It's not something that, my sister is going to know about, who couldn't care less about maps. But so I don't know. We use our marketing mechanisms, and we're getting the word out as much as we can, and using the means we have to make people aware that these tools are available. And now you have the information, so you can spread the word.
Any other questions? Anybody? Raise your hand, wave your arms. Everyone wants to go to lunch?
Thank you.